Now I'm going to introduce you to variables in JavaScript. Now variables are extremely powerful and allow you to do a lot of really quite advanced things, but for the moment we're just going to see how they work and how we can use them in our code. So to start off, I'm going to start with my challenge result from last time, and all I'm going to do is make it so that instead of changing this particular ID, so first div, I'm going to set that to a variable, and I'm going to quote that variable in the function. So first of all, I've got to create a variable. So I'm going to say var, that's the way that we create a variable in JavaScript, and I'm going to call it div ID, like that. So div ID, this is the ID of the div that we're referring to when we want to get rid of this display here. And I'm going to give it a value of first div. So I've created a variable, called it div ID, and given it a value of first div. And then if I refer to div ID in there, then that just does exactly the same as what we did before. So we've got a variable of div ID with a value of first div, and then we're referring to it here. So very simply, I've just reconstructed what I had before, but using a variable this time. So let's just check that that works. Great, it works fine. So that's all good. Now there's another way to kind of store variables in JavaScript. It's not really variables per se. We're not actually using the var, but I'm going to show you at this point anyway because it's quite fun. What we do is use an input. So let's say we have an input of an ID is going to be my input, and it's going to have a type of text, so the standard input there. And then what we can do is change when we click the button, change the content of this first div to whatever you've entered in the input. And then essentially the input is acting as a variable that the user can control and the program can access to set as some value. So let's see how we might do that. First of all, let's change this button up there. And in fact, I think I'll copy and paste my input and put it at the top so that it all makes a bit more sense. So I've got my input there, the button, and then the text. Let's have a look there. So there's my text, there's my input, and there's my button. So how am I going to do this? Let's keep my variable, but this time I'm going to call it new text, because this is going to be the variable that holds the new text. And I'm going to set it equal to document.getElement by ID, and then we want my input to be the ID because we're talking about the input up here, and we want value. So this will set the new text to be equal to the document.getElement by ID, my input value, so the value of this input up here. Now we then need to refer to that over here. So let's get rid of this div ID. So we're now, when the styles changer button is clicked, we're going to change the inner HTML of the first div ID. So we've got first div there, inner HTML, and we're going to set that equal to our variable new text. Okay, I'll just add something else to this. We're going to give it a default value. So we'll just say test for the moment. So that value equals test just means that the default value of the input will be test. So let's see what happens. So we've got tests there, change the text, excellent, that works fine. Now what happens if you try and type in your own text? It doesn't do anything. Interesting. Now take a moment and have a look at the code over here and see if you can see why it might not do anything. Any ideas? Well, what's going on is we've set this value of new text here, but then when this function happens, the new text value doesn't actually update. So it's actually still set to the original value of my input, which was test, which is why when we try and change the text, it's just changing it to test every time, which looks like it's not changing at all. So what we need to do is put a new line into our function here, which updates the value of new text. So I'm just going to copy and paste that part of that line. I don't need the var this time because the variable has already been defined. So the variable is defined, all I need to do is set it to the value of the input again. So now that should work. Let's have a look. So if I update that, works great. Testing 1, 2, 3. Brilliant. Okay, so we're using the input there as a variable, essentially, that the user can control. And we're using a JavaScript variable of new text, which we're setting to the value of the input value in order to change the HTML of the first div.